Hello, I am Eevee Pacini, and this is a Yap session. I am recording these just as a fun little off-the-cuff way, one to transition from TikTok, because at this point it is January 16th. TikTok might be banned, so I yap about Degrassi on TikTok. You might be familiar with my videos on TikTok. This is me switching over to a longer form of yapping about my favorite show and trying something new. So, hello, I'm Evie. If you aren't familiar with me, I am a long time Degrassi super fan. My favorite era of the show is like season 10 through Next Class with a special interest in Degrassi Next Class. That is the era that I was like graduating with. I graduated in 2014. I was actually supposed to graduate in 2016, but I graduated early online. If you want that lore drop, maybe another time. This is not the day for that. But I grew up and graduated basically with the class of 2016, which was the last graduating class of Degrassi Next Class. Those are my homies. Those are my classmates. Those are the characters that I care so much about, and they are like real people to me. I love yapping about them. I love yapping about what could have been. That era to me signifies so much potential and so much like lost opportunity. I think there is a lot that was lost because of the awkward transition to Netflix from seasons 13 and 14. I posted a little short yap session called Does Degrassi Next Class Deserve More Credit? I believe is what it's called. I'll link it somewhere around here, where I was just kind of experimenting with this video format. I talked a little bit about the transition from season 13 and 14 to Netflix and how kind of awkward it was, and how I feel like Degrassi learned a lot of lessons from seasons 1 and 2 being kind of clunky and awkward and improved in seasons 3 and 4, and how much I feel like Degrassi Next Class seasons 5, 6, and beyond would have fucking slapped, because like they were really just hitting their stride at that point and just kind of figuring out the format of being a Netflix original and what that meant. But anyway, I am here to just kind of yap a little bit more about Next Class. I want to delve into specific topics and my opinions and my view of Degrassi Next Class. I have thought about this show nonstop for like over a decade at this point, so I might as well might as well share my the fruits of my thought. I don't even know what that means, with people who might want to listen and people who might care about this show as much as I do. I feel like that is kind of a little bit of my background of my interest in Degrassi Next Class. I feel like I kind of went off on a million tangents there, but that is what a yap session is about. I am going off script here. I am just talking to you guys. Maybe this will feel like a FaceTime. Maybe this will feel like I don't know exactly what the vibe I'm going for here yet is. I just know that I'm turning on my camera and I am yapping. I hope you guys enjoy it. I just want to take a moment to say thank you to people who watched my first video. If you guys have any requests for specific yap sessions that you would like to hear, let me know. Let's talk about Zoe Rivas. And the angle that I want to take is that I feel like everything that she did made sense, or at least I can justify, not defend, but I can justify every step that the writers took. I can't justify the way that they went about it because there's some very questionable things in seasons 13 and 14. But on paper, I think every step that they took with Zoe Rivas made sense with the character that they had established. Or at least the character that I have created in my mind with the extra context. Because one thing about my love for fictional characters is I love a character that I can like interpret. I love a character who is complicated. Zoe Rivas is definitely complicated. I am going to first talk about her sexuality because I feel like that is one of the like most argued things, that Zoe Rivas's sexuality came out of nowhere, that she liked boys and then all of a sudden in Next Class they decided that they wanted a lesbian character, so they made her a lesbian. I could not disagree more. I think out of all of the characters that became lesbians on the show, I think that Zoe Rivas is the one that makes the most sense. I think it is entirely possible that they didn't plan for this character to be a lesbian from day one, but I think everything in this character's history and everything, like every single one of this character's actions lines up with being a lesbian. I think Zoe is very similar to Fiona Coyne, where I believe Annie Clark said in an interview with Degrassi Kid that Fiona wasn't brought into the show as a lesbian. They pulled her aside before the episode where Fiona came out, and they were like, "Hey, just so you know, like this is a plot line that we've decided to go with." It's not like when Annie Clark auditioned, they were like, "Hey, this is Fiona and she's a lesbian character." Like that's not what happened. And I think it's entirely possible that that's not necessarily what happened with Zoe's character. I think there's also an argument that can be made, and I've made a TikTok about this before actually, that Zoe could have possibly been kind of planned to be a lesbian from the start because, fun fact, the character Adam was originally an androgynous character named Zoe, or the character that Jordan Todesey was auditioning for originally that turned into Adam was an androgynous lesbian character with short hair named Zoe. So they at least kind of had the idea that they wanted a lesbian character around this era, and then they decided we're actually going to go with a transgender story instead. And then Zoe happened to show up. Adam showed up in season 10, and then Zoe shows up in season 13. So 3 seasons later, it feels like maybe they took that idea for Zoe the lesbian and kind of put that in their back pocket. And we're kind of like, okay, well, we're not going to use this now, but like maybe a little bit later, we're going to make it Zoe Rivas, perhaps. I think that is 100% speculation. That is just my theory, but like, I think there's something there. Like I said, even if Zoe wasn't like originally planned to be a lesbian, which I think is kind of arguable, again, we can argue it. We can argue it if we want. I think there is so much from day one that Zoe chose to be like gay behavior. Like the way that she reacts to Maya, the jealousy that she has for Maya is very, very queer coded. And I say this as a queer woman. Just that feeling of like, what am I feeling right now? Like, am I in love with you? Do I hate you? Like, that is very much Zoe's feeling from the beginning. And people say that like she was bullying Maya and all that. And yes, she was bullying Maya. Like the actions were bullying, but the feelings behind it, I don't think were this like mean girl, malicious, like nothing else behind it. I think she was like, Maya makes me feel confused and I can't really identify this feeling that Maya's making me feel, but like I don't like it and therefore I'm going to take it out on Maya and I'm not going to be nice to Maya because like I can't be nice to Maya. That is a very queer experience. And even if they weren't planning on Zoe being gay at that point, it is gay. Like it comes across as gay and it rings true when she later comes out. And that is like exhibit number one of a million different exhibits of Zoe's behavior far before coming out that exhibited queerness. When it comes to Zoe dating boys, every single relationship that Zoe had with a boy, Drew, Miles, Winston, were all transactional. They were all for popularity or gain or to make Maya jealous, or with Winston, literally to hide the fact that she was gay. I really wish that the show had addressed this though properly because they really left it up to interpretation that this is why Zoe was dating these boys. But like, if you take 2 seconds and interpret it, it's there. And I think people are being like willfully ignorant if they act like it's not there. So with all of Zoe's relationships with boys either being like to kind of fuel this rivalry and jealousy with Maya, who in my opinion she had a crush on, or to gain status when she just moved to a new school and she's feeling powerless. And this is literally how her mom taught her to go about the world. And we see this in several occasions where her mother teaches her to like behave certain ways in order to get what she wants, in order to advance, in order to like get roles, in order to get out of trouble. This has been like hammered into her brain from birth that you mold yourself into whatever people want you to be. That sort of parenting creates identity issues in people who don't already struggle with their sexuality. This, like, playing a role and people pleasing and molding yourself into a certain identity in order to please people, in order to get what you want, very much leads into my next point, which is something that I'm going to not defend because I think the storyline is horrible in and of itself, but I'm going to explain how I think that Degrassi nudes on some level makes sense for Zoe. Yes, I'm gonna say it. I'm saying it. I again, am not defending the plot line. I think it was incredibly inappropriate and a little bit sus and just like weirdly executed. Also, like two Pretty Little Liars. I don't like it, but I do understand where the writers were coming from, and I do think that it is a valid and true like trauma response. I think that it should have been a much shorter plot line. It should have been much more isolated to Zoe inflicting that on herself and using that as a trauma response and acknowledging that it is a trauma response. That is not the way that that storyline played out, but I do see that that is kind of, I think, what they were going for with that plot line. And I do think that it is in line with who Zoe is up until that point. I maybe even have an argument that her being this like ringleader makes sense on some level. And this is okay. This leans into like heavy interpretation and me kind of coming up with reasoning for this plot line. I don't believe that this is what the writers were going for, but with the Degrassi Nudes plot line, I think it is possible that it was a heavy trauma response and that Zoe dissociated after her trauma, after the trial, after everything, and didn't feel like she could be vulnerable, be herself at school. And so she leaned heavily into playing this like mean girl role, embodying a personality that wasn't really her own. I think that is an explanation that does make a level of sense. And I think Degrassi didn't do that well, if that's what they were going for, honestly. On paper, I think there is a world where that could have worked and where that is like an interesting, complex storyline that plays out, where Zoe experiences what she does in season 13 with Luke Baker and Neil, I don't know his last name, and after that closes herself off, walls herself off, becomes this mean girl character because that is what she was at the beginning of season 13. She came in and she was playing this character, and then she kind of softened and let people in and started being herself a little bit more. And then that happened and she was treated horribly. And I could see a world where she built a character and started embodying that character and started dissociating it and started saying, I can't be myself. It's not safe to be myself. Removing herself and playing a role. There's a difference between her doing that and then her choosing to inflict that on other girls. And I think that's where Degrassi went wrong, is choosing to have this like ring that she creates where she's like forcing other girls into something. And it's just like that part does not fucking work for me on any level. I do think there is some credence to the idea that she plays this character in that era. And then after that all crashes and burns, she really has to rebuild and find her true self. And that true self is the lesbian that we meet in next class. And I think that is, again, on paper, I think there are some problems with the execution. I think that is an interesting, complicated, complex natural progression for a character. So on paper, we're seeing this girl who has lived a life where her mom has like made her play these roles, literally and figuratively. Like she hasn't felt like she has ever really had an identity to herself. She's always been pleasing other people. She's always been playing a role and trying to advance and trying to make people like her and trying to gain status. And her mother expects this of her. Her mother expects her to have this certain life, to have this like heteronormative successful life that she realizes later on that she doesn't really want. Like, that's not her. I need a coffee break. So we have this like people-pleasing child star, like bundle of nerves coming to Degrassi, who feels like she has to like uphold this image and gain this like power and status at a school where she very quickly loses that status and people are much more interested in Maya. Like, why do people like Maya? Why do people not like me? So she makes it her mission to tear Maya down. She struggles to find acceptance at school, tries to be this like queen bee, and it doesn't really work out, tries to like date the popular guys, and it doesn't really work out. And that's because that isn't who Zoe authentically is. It's a role that she's trying to play. You see her constantly struggling to keep up appearances. Zoe is constantly this like vulnerable, scared little girl trying to project a certain image to the world, and it isn't working. And it isn't because she's like a flawed, bad person. It's because that isn't who she is. It's just because she's being inauthentic and because she doesn't feel like she's going to be accepted for who she is. And that is the queer experience. Hurt people. And she is hurting so bad because she's so confused as to who she is. And she doesn't have a household where like being gay is even something that she has been able to think about because her mom has such specific expectations of her. I just think that Zoe, again, on paper, the execution is a little bit flip-floppy, but that's hard also with a show with so many different characters. I think if Zoe were the main character of her own story and the writer's room was specifically dedicated to telling her story and not using her as a pawn in other people's stories because she did things that I think she wouldn't have necessarily done because a show always needs a villain. And she was an easy antagonist, but I think that there are a lot of times where because it's an ensemble cast and because there has to be a billion, because there has to be a villain, Zoe was perhaps meaner than she would have been if she were the main character and if she were getting main character treatment and if we were trying to tell her story fully authentically. I want to talk about the missed opportunity that is Zoe and Esme because I think those two characters have a lot in common. And I think that if they had gotten a chance to interact on more of a deeper level, that it would have been really impactful for both of those characters. I've had this theory that if they put Zoe in the place of Miles in the season one Degrassi Next Class substance abuse storyline with Esme, that it would have hit really hard and would have worked really well for both Zoe and Esme. I think having Zoe return to having substance issues would have had a lot more weight than Miles just picking up the substance issues out of kind of nowhere. Like he had had issues with weed, but like, I don't know. Like, I just feel like it was kind of unnecessary. And I don't feel like his substance abuse was like a key defining struggle of his character. I feel like it was just kind of like something that did happen that felt more like a plot device. It was an impactful storyline, don't get me wrong, but it doesn't feel like when I think about Miles's like big plot lines. I don't think about his substance abuse plot line. I think more about like his anxiety than anything, which was kind of a result of his substance abuse, but it was also kind of just like something that existed already. But speaking of things that existed already, Zoe's substance abuse issue existed already. And I know that there is an issue with going from seasons 13 and 14 to Netflix. They didn't want to carry too many of the plot lines over because they didn't want it to be too confusing. But I feel like it would have been very easy to explain for Zoe to explain, like, oh, I had substance issues in the past before like it's a very quick thing that she could have said that her getting involved with Esme and relapsing and mentioning that it was an issue before wouldn't have been too confusing for previous audiences. It would have been the same as like how Maya mentions Cam later on. Like it's a brief mention of the canon that existed previous to Degrassi Next Class, but it's not like expecting a whole new audience to like they won't be confused by the by the mention is what I'm saying, basically. But I feel like just getting Zoe and Esme involved with each other instead of Zoe and Grace also would have been really powerful because Esme is actually a queer woman. Like she explores her sexuality with Frankie as well. I just really didn't like the Grace plotline personally. I think it would have been better if it were Zoe and Esme, and Zoe exploring her sexuality with Esme and them having a moment and it just not working out, but Zoe still having that experience, being confused and not hooking up with Zig, not hooking up with Zig, not hooking up with Zig. Please, I hate that plotline so much. I feel like this is a little bit all over the place. That's the spirit of the app sesh. We're just talking. We're just spitballing. I'm not going off of a script. I'm not going off of an outline. I'm not doing anything crazy. I'm just yapping. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed me talking a little bit about Degrassi Next Class and the progression of Zoe Rivas. Please leave your thoughts and opinions in the comments below. Do you feel like Zoe Rivas's plot lines and like story arc make sense? Do you feel like it was better on paper than the execution? What is your least favorite Zoe plot line? How do you feel about Degrassi nudes? Be careful how you discuss certain things in the comments because YouTube will probably flag these conversations. I feel like I tried to be careful with my language, but hopefully I don't get flagged or but I don't know. I'm not monetized, so it doesn't matter. Anyway, I'm gonna end this yap sesh here. I'm gonna put my link tree in the description if you want to follow me other places. Please subscribe. Please like this video if you enjoyed me talking. Please leave some comments. Please let me know what you think. I'm gonna keep making these videos. I hope you enjoy watching them. Thanks for yapping with me. Have a good day. Bye.